she vanished in the middle of the day. No struggle, no witnesses, just a phone left behind on the side of the road. For a while, that was all anyone knew. On the morning of November 2nd, 2016, Sherri Papini went out for a jog near her home in Redding, California. It was an ordinary routine. She texted her husband, Keith, earlier that morning. Later, she sent a message saying she was listening to music while running. Nothing in those messages suggested urgency. Nothing suggested fear. When Sherri did not return home, Keith grew worried. Hours passed, then evening. By the time he went looking for her, the concern had shifted into something heavier. He found her phone first. It was lying near the road, tangled in strands of blonde hair. That single image would define the next 3 weeks. Police arrived quickly. Deputies walked the area. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the terrain. Friends and volunteers flooded the neighborhood. The idea that a young mother could simply disappear during a daytime jog sent a ripple of fear through the community. This was not a remote trail. This was a residential area. Subdivisions, driveways, mailboxes. Someone had taken her. That was the assumption almost immediately. Keith spoke to the media that night. His voice shook as he described his wife, a devoted mother, a caring friend, someone who would never leave her children behind voluntarily. His plea was simple. If anyone had seen anything at all, come forward. Within hours, the case spread beyond Redding. News outlets picked it up. Social media filled with photos of Sherri. Blonde hair, bright smile, running outfit. The image of a woman mid-jog became a symbol of vulnerability. If this could happen here, it could happen anywhere. Investigators began reconstructing Sherri's last known movements. Her phone data showed she had stopped moving abruptly. No calls, no outgoing texts, no signs of a struggle on the device itself. Just silence. There were no witnesses who saw her being forced into a vehicle. No surveillance footage. No ransom demands. No communication from whoever had taken her. And yet, something about the scene felt deliberate. The phone was placed, not thrown. The hair was tangled around it, as if meant to be noticed. It looked staged, or at least intentional. Law enforcement avoided speculation publicly, but privately, questions began to surface. Abductions in broad daylight were rare, stranger kidnappings even more so. And yet, there was no obvious alternative explanation. Sherri's family held on to hope. Vigils were organized. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees and mailboxes. Volunteers searched fields and trails well beyond the initial area. Every day without answers intensified the pressure on investigators. As the days passed, the story hardened into a narrative. A loving mother taken by force. A community under threat. A race against time. If you're finding this case unsettling so far, stay with it. And if you want more deeply researched cases told this way, take a moment to subscribe. These stories often change direction when you least expect it. By the end of the first week, tips poured in from across the country. Reported sightings, suspicious vehicles, rumors of trafficking rings. None of it led anywhere concrete. Then, a new detail quietly entered the investigation. Sherri had been texting someone that morning. Someone Keith did not know. At first, it seemed minor. People text all the time. Friends, family, parents from school. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized the messages did not fit neatly into the story that was forming publicly. Still, they said nothing. 3 weeks after Sherri vanished, just as fear was beginning to settle into resignation, everything changed. But not in the way anyone expected. By the second week, the search had slowed, but the story had not. Sherri Papini's face was everywhere. Morning shows, evening news. Online headlines framed her disappearance as a warning. Mothers stopped jogging alone. Neighborhood groups shared safety tips. People who had never been to Reading felt invested in what happened there. And still, there was nothing. No ransom note, no phone call, no proof of life. Investigators began working backward, not from the disappearance itself, but from Sherri's life. They interviewed friends, family members, neighbors. They asked about routines, relationships, recent stressors. Most answers pointed in the same direction. She was happy. She loved her kids. She had no reason to disappear. But the more questions they asked, the more the picture blurred. Some friends mentioned that Sherri had been active on social media. Very active. She posted often, sometimes late at night. She curated her image carefully. Photos, captions, updates that painted a life that was full and stable. That in itself was not unusual, but investigators noticed something else. There were gaps. Certain friendships seemed to exist mostly online. Some people who appeared close to her had never met her in person. Others had drifted away abruptly. A few former acquaintances described her as dramatic, attention-seeking. Those words did not make it into the news. At the same time, Keith remained visible. He spoke at press conferences. He thanked volunteers. He expressed frustration with the lack of progress, but never anger at investigators. To the public, he looked exactly like a man living every parent's nightmare. Behind the scenes, detectives examined Sherri's phone records more closely. They confirmed the unknown contact. It was not a local number. The messages were casual, familiar. Not the kind of tone you use with a stranger. And the conversation did not end in panic or fear. It simply stopped. When detectives asked Keith about it, he was surprised. He could not explain it. He had never heard the name associated with the number. Still, there was no evidence tying that contact to her disappearance. Then came the physical details that troubled investigators the most. Search teams had combed the area where Sherri's phone was found. Dogs traced her scent for a short distance, then lost it. That suggested a vehicle. But there were no tire tracks, no witnesses who saw a car stop, no neighbors who heard a struggle. And yet, the placement of the phone felt symbolic, almost theatrical. Investigators kept these doubts internal. Publicly, the case remained a kidnapping. Anything else risked backlash. A missing mother was not someone you questioned out loud. As days stretched into weeks, some began to quietly wonder whether Sherri was still alive. Then, just before dawn on Thanksgiving morning, a call came in. A woman had been found on the side of a highway, more than 140 miles from where Sherri disappeared. She was thin, bruised. Her hair had been cut unevenly. A chain was around her waist. She was shaking. When officers approached her, she whispered a name. Sherri. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. News broke within minutes. She was alive. She had survived. Against the odds, she had come back. At the hospital, Sherri told a horrifying story. She said she had been abducted by 2 women. They wore masks. They spoke Spanish. She described being beaten, starved, branded, and kept chained for weeks. The details were graphic. The injuries appeared real. The branding on her shoulder would later become one of the most discussed images of the case. For the public, this was the ending they had been praying for. A victim rescued, a family reunited, a community vindicated in its fear. But for investigators, the case was far from over. Because the story Sherri told raised more questions than it answered. If you think the mystery ended when she was found, stay with this story. And if you want to support this kind of long-form storytelling, a simple like helps more than you might realize. For the public, Sherri's return felt like closure. For investigators, it felt like the beginning of a second case. At the hospital, detectives listened carefully as Sherri described the 22 days she said she spent in captivity. 2 women, she claimed, faces covered. One older, one younger. They spoke Spanish to each other, though Sherri said she could not understand everything they said. She described being bound, beaten, starved, and branded. Some of her injuries were impossible to ignore. She was underweight. Her nose was broken. There were cuts and bruises along her arms and legs. And on her shoulder, burned into the skin, was a symbol investigators had never seen before. To the outside world, the injuries confirmed the story. To trained eyes, they raised questions. Doctors documented her condition carefully. Law enforcement photographed everything. The branding was real, but it was unusually precise. Not rushed, not chaotic. It looked deliberate, almost practiced. When detectives asked for more details, Sherri struggled. She could describe the room where she was held, but not where it was located. She could describe her captors' voices, but not their faces. She could recall certain moments vividly, but entire stretches of time seemed missing. Trauma can do that. Investigators knew this. They did not dismiss her account outright. But then they tried to verify it. They searched for similar abductions. None matched. They looked for reports involving 2 masked women. Nothing. They canvassed areas along the highway where she was found. No witnesses, no vehicles, no suspicious properties. They brought in a Spanish-speaking officer to review her account more closely. The phrasing Sherri attributed to her captors did not sound natural. Some words were off. Some expressions did not align with how native speakers typically speak. Again, not proof, just friction. Then came the branding. Investigators circulated images of the mark to specialists. No known gang symbol, no trafficking indicator, no extremist or criminal connection. It was unique, personal. As days passed, public attention began to fade. Sherri recovered at home. Keith asked for privacy. Law enforcement maintained that the investigation was ongoing, but there were no new leads to share. Behind closed doors, detectives went back to the beginning. They re-examined Sherri's phone records. The unknown contact surfaced again. This time, they traced it further. It belonged to a man in Southern California, someone Sherri had known years earlier. When they reached out to him, his response was immediate. He told them Sherri had contacted him before she disappeared. He told them she had asked for help. And most importantly, he told them he had not kidnapped her. Investigators did not confront Sherri right away. They gathered more. They pulled financial records. They reviewed past police reports involving Sherri. Minor incidents. Inconsistent statements. Nothing criminal on its own. But together, they formed a pattern. A pattern of exaggeration. A pattern of crisis. A pattern of control through narrative. Still, there was no smoking gun. For years, the case lingered in this uneasy space, officially unsolved, publicly accepted, quietly questioned. Until advances in forensic technology reopened doors investigators had not been able to open before. And when they did, the story Sherri had told for years began to collapse in on itself. For nearly 4 years, the case sat in a strange limbo. Publicly, Sherri was still a survivor. Privately, detectives had never stopped working. They had not found her captors because, increasingly, they were no longer convinced the captors existed. What changed everything was not a confession or a witness. It was a piece of evidence that had been collected on day 1 and quietly stored away. The clothing. When Sherri was found on Thanksgiving morning, she was wearing items she claimed had been given to her by her abductors. Those clothes were bagged, tagged, and preserved. At the time, DNA testing offered little. The technology simply was not advanced enough to produce useful results from what they had. Years later, that changed. Investigators ran the DNA again, this time using newer forensic methods. What came back was not the profile of an unknown female captor. It was male, and not just male. The DNA matched someone already in the system. The same man Sherri had been texting the morning she disappeared. When detectives contacted him again, the tone of the case shifted immediately. This time, the questions were direct. Where was she during those 22 days? What had actually happened? The man did not hesitate. He told them Sherri had asked him to come get her. She had given him instructions. She had told him where to meet her. He drove from Southern California to pick her up, exactly as planned. She stayed with him for weeks. No chains, no locked rooms, no masked women. He described her as calm, cooperative, and in control of the situation. He told investigators that many of the injuries were not the result of an attack, that she asked him to help keep her hidden, and that the branding was something she had planned beforehand. Detectives corroborated his story piece by piece. Cell phone pings placed them together. Receipts confirmed purchases during the time she was supposedly missing. Surveillance footage placed his vehicle in locations consistent with his account. Nothing about it looked accidental. When investigators finally confronted Sherri with the evidence, there was no dramatic outburst, no immediate confession. She denied it, claimed she had been manipulated, claimed fear, claimed she had been coerced into silence. But the evidence did not support that version either. The man had no criminal record, no history of violence, no motive to fabricate such an elaborate story, and his account aligned cleanly with the forensic data. Still, prosecutors moved carefully. Accusing a supposed victim of fabricating her own abduction is not something you rush. The public fallout alone could have been catastrophic if they were wrong. They waited. They built the case quietly. And then, in March of 2022, nearly 6 years after Sherri vanished, federal agents knocked on her door. If you are still with this story, you are almost at the moment where everything finally comes into focus. Before we reach the end, take a second to make sure you are subscribed. The final part of this case reframes every single moment that came before it. The arrest did not happen in the middle of the night. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic standoff. Federal agents arrived quietly, presented the evidence, and took Sherri Papini into custody without resistance. For years, she had lived as a survivor. Interviews, victim compensation funds, public sympathy. Her story had shaped policy discussions, safety conversations, and personal fears far beyond Redding. Now, that story was being formally dismantled. Prosecutors laid out the case in plain terms. Sherri had not been abducted. She had orchestrated her disappearance. She had injured herself. She had lied to law enforcement, to her family, and to the public. The charges were federal, not symbolic. Making false statements. Mail fraud tied to victim compensation she received while claiming to be kidnapped. This was no longer about public opinion or embarrassment. It was about accountability. When the details became public, the reaction was immediate and fractured. Some felt anger, others disbelief. Many felt uneasy about how fully the story had been accepted. A few asked deeper questions about why someone would go to such lengths to control a narrative. In court, prosecutors avoided speculation. They focused on evidence: DNA from the clothing, phone records that placed her where she said she was not, travel logs, and receipts that filled in the missing days. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. There were no masked women. There was no captivity. There was no rescue. In April 2022, Sherri pleaded guilty. She admitted the disappearance was staged. She admitted the injuries were self-inflicted or planned. She admitted lying repeatedly, even after returning home to a community that believed her. The sentence came months later. Prison time, restitution, supervised release. Legally, the case was closed. But its impact did not end there. For her family, trust had been permanently altered. For investigators, the case became a reminder of how carefully belief must be balanced with verification. For the public, it forced an uncomfortable reflection on how quickly fear and empathy can solidify into certainty. This case was never just about a disappearance. It was about how convincingly a story can be lived. Some disappearances end with relief. Some end with answers. This one ended with a reckoning. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this story compelling, take a moment to like the video. It helps more than you might think. And if you want more cases told with patience, context, and the full story revealed only when it matters most, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who still remembers this case differently.